So welcome to Disruptor Confessions, where we have honest conversations with the people reshaping how we live, work, and actually think. I'm your host, John Ayers, and today's guest is Dr. Vanessa Druskat. Some people call her the Jane Goodall of teams, because she's actually been, for over 3 decades, really studying how teams work, the team dynamics. She's been inside the boardrooms and conference rooms of some of the top companies in the world, observing team dynamics, seeing when things work, and unlocking the secrets of why teams break under pressure and why do other teams actually thrive in the face of disruption. So it's super exciting for me. Selfishly, I kind of want to leverage some of the thinking from Vanessa, so this will be a great conversation. She's not only an award-winning scholar, but she's now the author of a new book, The Emotionally Intelligent Team: Building Collaborative Groups That Outperform the Rest. So Vanessa, thanks for joining Disruptor Confessions.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you, John. My pleasure.
I always like to find out where someone is at in their day. How's your day going? How are you today?
I'm great. I just got off a call with a former graduate student, and we're doing some writing together. So I'm in idea mode, and I'm feeling great today. Thanks.
Awesome.
How about you? How are you?
Me as well. This is kind of my highlight today. I'm super excited about it. Getting into your material. And in fact, if we think about emotional and intelligence and team, when did you first realize that the emotional side of teamwork was kind of the game changer?
Sure. Great question. Let me start by saying that I've always been interested in teams. I had some really good team experiences when I was young. And I decided that when I hit the workplace, they just weren't anything like what I had experienced previously. Say in sports teams or in some of the work that I had done when I was younger. And so when I went back to school, I had already studied psychology as an undergraduate. And when I went back to school, I said, I want to really understand teams. What's going on? Why do some of them... How come sometimes when I'm in a team, I feel so strong, so smart, so capable? And sometimes I'm in a team and I just feel dumb and no one listens to me? And is it me or is it the team? I was really curious about that. So I did a master's degree and focused on that. Then I went back and did my doctorate in it. And at one point I realized that they just were not answering the question. And, at this point in my education, I was reading articles written by academics and even reading articles in the popular press, but I needed more. It wasn't telling me, how do you build a team? What's going on in the team's environment? Everything focused on, hire the best team members, compose people with the right personalities. And I thought, I can have the right personality or I can have the wrong personality. And so much of it depends on the environment. So anyway, I ended up signing up for a course in team facilitation. I started looking outside of the academic world to look for ideas. And I signed up for this course in team facilitation, and I learned, this was with the National Training Laboratories, which is an interesting organization that's based in DC, and they train facilitators. On one of the first days, I learned that the best way to tell what was going on in the team was to look at the emotion on people's faces.
So this is kind of your first aha moment, very early. And it seems like you're the 5 whys personality. You want to like that little child, like, why mommy? So it seems like that's almost part of your DNA. And then around this time, you're going, wait a second, there's another why question I'm not getting an answer. And is that kind of where the emotional side of it started to really...
Yes.
Interesting.
Absolutely. I kept asking why. And this, at first, I have to just tell you, at first I thought, this is crazy. What do you mean the emotion in the room? I'd never heard anything like that before. You got to remember, this was actually pre-research on emotional intelligence. So I'd never heard of the term yet. Mm-hmm. Probably about 8 years ahead of that. Mm-hmm. And so at first I thought, that's crazy. What do you mean the emotion? What does that mean? Well, then the next step of that was look at the emotion, see what emotion you're catching, because emotion is contagious. And oftentimes the emotion that you're feeling is what others are feeling. Watch that emotion and then make an intervention. Say something based on the emotion. And so that seemed even sillier, but then I did, and it worked.
So going back to emotionally intelligent and teams, we'll get into this, but there is what you just said. There's the individual, there's team dynamics, and we probably will get into stakeholders. So beyond the individual and beyond the team, there's opportunities to really tap into, and we might talk about that. So I find that your book is really a how-to. And I love that because I think what you're talking about is you were even asking yourself way before the phrase emotional intelligence came out, well, what do you mean, Vanessa? What am I really getting at emotional? What do you mean? And I think there is this, people start to become skeptics when they think about bringing emotional feelings into a workplace, into a team dynamic. I think for me, the big idea is what you just touched on. I have always worked at bring the best and the brightest, bring the stars, bring the high performing, bring that expert, and make sure that you have a diverse team. I was really into the balanced team. So I guess the thing there that you're saying, you argue that great teams aren't built by hiring stars, right? Like it's more about shaping, and this is the first time our listeners are going to hear the phrase, but shaping team norms.
Yes.
And Vanessa, I think this is what's super interesting about your book. It's not just theoretical, it's practical. So can you tap into that? What are some examples that you would point to that makes the difference between what I would call an average team and a high-performing team leveraging team norms?
One of the most important norms, and again, I just want to say one thing. I learned about these norms by studying, like being that Jane Goodall who went in there and watched and observed and studied and interviewed and surveyed, studying the greats, the great teams, and studying the average teams. And I looked at what's going on in those great teams. People are engaged. People are paying attention. In the average teams, you'd have people taking notes on the side, not necessarily involved, not necessarily caring about what people were saying. And they were certainly getting the work done, but they weren't doing it together. So in the high-performing teams, the norms were about paying attention to one another, really listening to one another, building on one another's ideas. And you see it in the nonverbals. And dare I say, you see it in the emotion in the room. The emotion in the room is one of engagement and attention and care, versus the average teams, the emotion is, all right, when are we going to get over with this? How can we speed this up a little bit? Why is so-and-so going on and on and on again? Well, I'll tell you why so-and-so is going on and on again, because nobody cares what so-and-so is saying. And so they're bound and determined to make sure they get heard. And so anyway, the norms are different. They look different. They feel different. But here's the good news. You can build that. And so much of my career, first I spent the first part of my career studying what those norms were. And again, back to this idea that it's not about hiring the stars. So often, I always, believe it or not, considered myself a star in some teams, right? I could be your hardest working. I started working at the age of 12, working on farms, and I always got rehired. People, they would call me and say, we want you back, because I was a hard worker, okay, under some conditions. And so I always knew that I could be a star or I could be a dud, right? And so the question was whether or not you use the talents of the people in the room. And you need norms that draw in those talents. And so that's what differentiates. Let me stop there because I know you got a million questions.
Can I ask you about the word norms? I look at it as habits. I look at it as a little bit of a social contract among team members. How do you, for those who are trying to get their head around what you're referring to as team norms, can you share a little bit about how you see that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a tough word. I've worked with so many people to try to come up with a better word because it just seems so theoretical and academic. but it isn't a better word. We talk about routines or habits. It's the expectations. And it's so clear when you go from one team to another, they'll be doing the exact same task, but the way they interact is different. So I think a good example is to talk about a team whose norms we changed. This was a team that was not getting along, was not doing very well. And one of the primary problems there, they were brilliant, by the way. The people in that team were your high performers. They were really individually, really high performing. They were all leading their own organizations, and they were high performing people, well educated, anything you'd want that you'd think, oh, here'd be a good employee. But they weren't helping one another. They weren't sharing information. They were hoarding their information, and they were keeping to themselves, right, in the meeting. So anyway, I can tell you a lot more about this team if you want, but one of the norms, we were trying to get them to focus on respect. How do you define respect? How are you going to care about one another when you're talking? And they decided they were going to lean in, look one another in the eye, and nod their head when people were talking. And, previously in meetings, they were rolling their eyes. That's a norm. That's allowed. They were not really attending. They were picking up their phones. They were multitasking during meetings. They changed that. Instead, they started looking at someone as they were talking and acknowledging that they were hearing. Guess what happens when you do that? You start listening more. And so they started listening. They started giving one another advice. They started sharing more. Once you know, you're heard. And so the norm, first it started off as a joke because this was an all-male, very masculine team. Yeah. And it ended up being really a game changer for them because the norm of not caring turned into a norm of caring and supporting.
So it's almost, if I read that back to you, it's almost like an emotional fabric that everybody is agreeing to.
Yes.
It kind of ties people to work together.
Yes.
I find that interesting because I think anybody who's been in a team environment, I also want to have you help us understand how you look at a team. Is it 3 people? Is it 300 people? How do you look at scale and how do you define that? Mm-hmm. How does emotional intelligence scale? So maybe that's a whole nother conversation. But this notion of how we work together, I think we all have been in those experiences where you have really high performing individuals. You might have friction between them that some people, as you say, hoarding their information. You might have what we might refer to as the wallflower who's always quiet. But it's just, as you described, not really supporting each other, not working together. And I think what's super interesting about your work and your book and your kind of observation for X number of years before you could really even identify and codify it is, we all sense what you have made sense of. So I think what's super interesting to me is getting into your book, Vanessa has identified it and has unpacked it and I would say decodified it and made sense of it for us to actually bring practical thinking to it.
Yes.
When you have a really great team, it's really interesting to observe why are they so good? Mm-hmm. 2 different teams, similar skill set, but why is one team performing? But when there's crisis, how do you navigate that? What does your work tell us about how emotionally intelligent teams handle high energy stakes and uncertainty around that different than an average team might?
Sure. So I just want to step back and say one thing, which is that every team has norms. There's no such thing. We are cultural beings. Humans are cultural beings. And from the moment we're born, we're observing our parents, to tell us, our friends in schools, to tell us how should we behave in this particular environment. Okay. And so you automatically develop norms. Typically, it's because the norms emerge and are controlled mostly by leaders, either formal or informal. Okay, so these are people who have status in the team. And so that when you get into a team, you quickly figure out who's got status, who should I look to tell me how things are done in this team. All right. So I just want to give you that.
Let me ask about that. So I'm immediately putting myself back in 5th grade and my teacher, you're right. There's a leader. It's the 5th grade teacher and there's norms for the class.
Absolutely. Every classroom has different norms. Yeah.
So regardless of whether you're in a business environment, we by nature of human beings, we have norms. They
Yes.
might not all be good, but there are norms.
Dinner table norms. One of my favorite questions is, did you
Wonderful.
argue at the dinner table? Did everyone just listen to mom or dad, or could you, speak back to them and
Right.
disagree? I'll tell you, that filters everything later on in life. It's how you were taught as a child to react to disagreements. So anyway, yes, we have norms in all groups, and we're wired that way. It's what made humans so adaptable to change. So, Homo sapiens have lasted longer, or have lasted quite a long time, and have evolved and have been extremely successful. And the reason for that, and a lot of, biological anthropologists and psychological anthropologists, archaeologists, everyone agrees that it's because we're cultural beings and we could adapt. So the point is this: you can change your norms. Let me give you a great example. This may bore your audience or it may really intrigue them. One of the things that happens to you when you're a teenager, when you're a middle schooler, is that your hormones kick in to force you to start look at your friends to figure out how to behave and fit in. You build these skills that last for the rest of your life. This is when you build the skills that are gonna to take you into the workplace to adapt, to other places to adapt, to figure out what are the norms, how do I need to behave here. Well, that kicks in with hormones when you're young. In the US, we look to see what's cool, what gets status. And in the US, it tends to be risk-taking, sometimes bullying, mean things, whatever it is. A fascinating study done by an adolescent psychologist who went to look at Buddhist kids. They don't compete, or they don't look at status as someone who takes more risks or talks back or anything like that. Their status is earned by who's the most compassionate, who's the most empathetic. And so their teachers are frustrated by how often they compete around being compassionate and empathetic. It's the same sort of frustration with, can we just get down to work rather than everybody putting on this act? But the norms are different. What the values are, they're different in these different environments. And by the way, you want to change bullying in high schools and middle schools? Don't teach empathy. Doesn't mean a thing. Kids go back in, they can have all kinds of empathy, but if the high status people are engaging in bullying behavior, others will too. So what the research basically says, fantastic research done by Elizabeth Pollack at Princeton, says change the norms. She pulls out the popular kids. She works with them to create anti-bullying messages, puts them back in the schools, because we adapt our norms. We're good at adapting. And anyway, the norms adapt to less bullying. 30% less bullying in these New York State schools by just taking out the popular kids, putting them back in to say negative things about bullying.
So this emotionally intelligent team structure,
Yes,
allows those norms, those shared, agreed upon norms among those team members. They can be more adaptable in those high risk, uncertain times, the disruption that we all know comes to us in life and in business. So is that what it's about?
yes.
Talk about that. The
Yes.
highly intelligent, emotionally intelligent teams can adapt to those uncertain times better?
Yes, and let me tell you why. Because they feel more supported by one another. We tend to think of a resilience or adaptability as an individual trait. Okay? In fact, a lot of researchers now are showing that resilience is a process. It's not a trait. So in emotionally intelligent teams, one of the norms that we've found is that they're constantly assessing, how are we doing? What's going on out there? Do we need to adapt? And you alluded earlier to the idea of thinking about your stakeholders, finding out information about what's keeping them up at night. Well, guess what? When you do that, when you reach out more often to stakeholders, you're a little bit ahead of the game. So you can anticipate proactively, what are these changes coming down the pike that you need to adapt to? And so they are. And the process of that adaptation is everyone is involved in the conversations about what do we need to do? What do we need to change? That's a norm, that we include everyone in these conversations. And by the way, people want to be included in those. And the more often you do it, the more efficient it becomes. It's not something that takes a long time.
For us to understand how you look at a team, do you put walls around what a team is defined as? How do you define a team?
Sure. I typically define a team as 2 to 12, 15 people who need one another to get their work done. So they have to pass information back and forth to get their work done. So they have a shared goal, they're accountable to someone, and they need each other to get the work done. Now, that's quintessentially a team. We talk about teams in my field, we talk about teams and groups. So a department can be a group. And you still have norms in a larger, let's say 20, 22, 25 size group. You don't need one another as badly. Sometimes you've got these subgroups where people have to work together, but it's a little bit different. You still have norms. What are those norms? You know, do you wave to one another when you walk by one another in the hallway? You know, do you turn your cameras on during group meetings? You know, things like this that can make a difference. But you really need to build communal relationships if you're a smaller team that is really working together constantly to meet your shared goals.
So teams, as you describe, we're not looking at hundreds or thousands. We're looking at small teams. Like I would think of a team. I think of teams as a half dozen people. Typically, right, we're working on a project, we're working on an initiative. It has goals, it has milestones, it has deadlines, all the things that we think about in the work world, the projects that we're all involved in. When things go well, it's great. Sometimes, as you've described and your research has shown, like you've been the Jane Goodall, you've been that fly on the wall. And I love that. You've got these insights where you've been able to identify things that you've observed, make sense of them, and then try to reverse engineer how you can help those that are having challenges when they bring these amazing experts together and the team isn't working. So this notion of emotionally intelligent teams really resonates with me. I want to ask you something that might get a little bit more practical, because you also talked about leaders. Fifth grade teacher needs to set the stage, not the little boy in the third row, right? Like you have to have these norms, and society sets those norms. I think team dynamics, but leaders really kind of need to lead what those norms are, and then everybody has to buy in, if I'm hearing you. I want to ask about the word friction. So you actually write, great teams know how to navigate friction. And which I would say is prevalent. It's nothing new, especially in high pressure transformational situations.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't want to get into like where we've been 20, 30 years ago to where we're at today, but it goes without saying, we are now working remotely. We're now in a different environment with technology. We probably will you and I will probably chat a little bit about AI. So it just seems like there's more high pressure transformation, seemingly more friction or a different kind of friction. How can leaders reframe conflict as a source of creativity rather than a threat?
So I love that question. The reason I'm hesitating here is because for me, this is one of the hardest things for leaders. I find that a lot of leaders are afraid of conflict, and so they over-control their teams. And that over-control is to minimize this conflict that's going to be out of control. Everyone worries about the teams getting out of control. Who knows what's going to happen? Can I manage that? My experience is that that's never happened. I mean, I would say very rare does that happen. Very rare for it to happen. But what does happen is that conflict can ruin relationships. There's a reason why people hold back in teams and don't get into that friction. There's a reason why leaders and team members say, I'm going to hold it in. I don't want to risk, ticking off someone, especially someone who's higher than me in the hierarchy, or, the relationship is more important to me than this outcome. And so you have to recognize that the reason you have people in a team is so that you can push them, so that you can get their ideas rubbing up against one another, because it helps everyone to learn. So when you disagree with me, when you say, Vanessa, norms don't really matter. And then I have to say, wait a minute, why do they matter? How am I going to define norms? I have to get super clear on what I think, which forces you to get super clear. And we both learn more about what we're thinking and more about what the other person is thinking. And the whole team gets to see the synergies or the lack of synergy amongst it and build it all together. It's through this debate, this friction, if you will. It serves a valuable purpose in teams. You don't have that kind of debate, you don't have as much learning. So here's the question then. How do you keep that friction healthy and not ruining relationships? And I just have two responses to that. One, you build good relationships so that when you have the friction, they're already there. The relationships are already there. And then it's just about repairing the relationships because it hurts to disagree, especially strongly in a group. And so, the norms we have, as you know, in the book, we have 3 buckets of norms.
I was going to ask you about the cluster. Yeah,
3 clusters.
Yeah.
And the first cluster is all about getting to know one another and building those relationships. It's a foundation that enables you to get into conflict and feel okay. You're not risking your sense of belonging, your sense of inclusion or respect by disagreeing with someone. You know that because you know you're valued already, right? And then when you get into those conflicts, you're not worried about really destroying that relationship. But you do need to have a leader that says, okay, if there's going to be conflict, I'm going to let it go, but I can be willing to step in. In my field, there's 2 different kinds, really 2 different kinds of conflict. One that's about the task and what we're arguing about, and one that's personal. So that's when I say to you, okay, John, well, no wonder you don't agree with me. You never agree with anybody,
Right.
When was the last time you agreed with anybody? Okay, that's personal.
Well, we were kind of smiling, but we know we all know people, right? We see them at the grocery store where you can just see that's how they walk through their day.
Yeah. And it gets personal easily. It does. Sometimes it's the easiest response. So rather than responding to the smart thing you just said, it's easier for me to go to the personal, which happens. And so we got to cut that off. We have to have that in our recognition that we're not going to let the arguments get personal. We're going to stop then. Okay, Vanessa, this is not about John. This is about the ideas. Get back there. And then at the end, we come together and we say, John, thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. That was helpful. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you about that, though, because the very first thing you said is, well, I'm hesitant because people like the leaders, they kind of, I'll use my words, they want to sweep it under the rug. They want to make nicey nice. So what do you tell leaders about conflict? What do you tell leaders about their teams that aren't working? When you are observing firsthand where the conflict is and what can be used, how you can leverage, what do you tell leaders about how to manage that conflict and stay healthy?
Yeah. So what I tell them is, again, we've got these 3 buckets of norms. And when you build that first bucket, you build a greater sense of trust and psychological safety, right? So, and now that you've got it, you can spend it. You can spend that trust. You can spend that safety. And you can risk it. And that's going to allow you to be more innovative and come up with new ideas. So, but you've got to build it first. Right? Because otherwise you are going to have tough arguments. Now, let me just say, I learned this from the great teams. And in fact, I used to get in trouble in talking about this because I used to talk about the arguments I would see in these great teams that were yelling at each other. And I used to talk about that, and people was like, Vanessa, you sound like you're advocating yelling at each other. That's terrible.
Yeah.
So I pulled back from what I would say. Right. But I'll tell you, they were friends afterward.
So you actually are saying, hey, John, I didn't come up with this. I observed it and documented it.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
I didn't create this. I'm just telling you what I've observed for 30 years, and I've codified it. I've made sense of it.
Yes, that's exactly it. It was my goal to codify this, to crack the code, to use the phrase that you used with me earlier, to figure out, what is it what can we teach leaders? Because what I see in organizations, the most used intervention for building teams is to teach people about personality differences. Great. But again, it's all about the individuals. It's very helpful for me to know what your personality is and how we differ. That's very helpful. But it's one small thing. Now what do we do with it? Right? And so we put that under the norm of understanding team members. It's a constant building. I want to get to know you better and better and better. And so that when we do argue, I don't set you off. How sensitive are you? One of my favorite books out there is a book called First Break All the Rules. It was written by the Gallup, folks in the Gallup organization when they first started consulting. And they interview a leader who says, this is a great leader, by the way. This is a leader whose team consistently was one of the highest performers. And he said, well, some people, if they do something wrong, I speak to them gently because it would crush them. Some people, if they do something wrong, I actually fire them because I know it's the only way I'm going to get their attention. And the interviewers say, what are you doing? Don't you have to treat people equally or the same way? And he says, no, are you crazy? We're introverted folks on the team, and you know that they're not the ones you're going to scream at, right? But that requires getting to know one another. And that was the main takeaway in that book. And this is all in chapter 1 of that book. The main takeaway in it is that, hey, you got to get to know your people. You got to get to know them so you know how to motivate them.
You've got my mind just firing right now. I've got so many thoughts around this. I'm immediately thinking about how years ago someone said, hey, if you have difficult communicating with certain colleagues or whatever, if you're in the same neighborhood, same city, same whatever, go for a walk and have a meeting. And what you're talking about is your insights have really uncovered that. Why does that work? Why do two people walking together having a meeting? It's exactly what you're talking about. Why can people have this incredibly drawn out, fight and then go golfing in the afternoon or go have lunch together? It's because of what you're describing. Am I right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing about walking while you're doing it is that you can focus on something else. And so you can be a little more creative, right? You're doing two things at once. And it keeps you from being so self-protective and careful. You're more open in your conversation. You're more playful in your conversation. Walking is, I don't know if you've had this experience of flow. Have you ever heard of that term? It's where you're just in the zone.
Yes. I love it. Hey, I want to ask you, we're going to run out of time, but I want to keep going. We talked about buckets or clusters. Can you just briefly talk us through each kind of cluster one by one?
Yes.
And then that'll help me kind of get into some other question I want to ask you.
Yes, you bet. So again, let me first say that these buckets don't include things like clear goals, roles. There are things that we call foundational that you really need. I mean, you got to have a shared mission, and that's got to be clear, right? So we check that off.
These clusters because of why?
But the clusters build culture. The clusters are about the norms. Once you have clear goals, that's not going to get you to be a high performer. Great. Okay. They're clear, they're motivating, excellent. Check off that box.
Okay, so let's
dig into what makes you a high-performing team beyond.
Walk me through cluster 1, 2, and 3. I want to understand this. Yeah.
Cluster 1, we call cluster 1 how we help one another succeed. That's kind of like what's in it for me, right? And this is where we get to know one another. We figure out how to treat one another, how to demonstrate respect, and in fact, we give one another feedback. We ask them how they want it. We help one another grow and get better. All right. Back to that team I was describing where they were giving one another ideas and helping one another. I'm telling you, those folks were really helping one another succeed.
Well, cluster 1, helping one another.
Yes.
Okay.
Getting to know one another. It's all about the individual.
Yep.
Cluster 2 is about the functioning of the team as a whole. It's how we operate as a team as a whole.
Okay.
And so one of the key norms in that is about getting together and having open conversations that evaluate how we're doing, where you can ask a dumb question, where everyone gets on the same page. All right. This is, we're having a shared experience. We're creating a mental model together of how we're going to operate. We align. It's all in this conversation. What are you worried about, John? What do you think we could be going off on? What do we need to be doing differently, Vanessa? What do you think? Let's get it all together. We're going to have that conversation as a team. So there's a number of norms in there. Like we try to be proactive. We try to be a little optimistic. We make sure everyone is in on that conversation. And I'll say something more about that in a minute. after I talk about the third cluster.
So the third cluster is actually super interesting to me because I think about 1 and 2. I don't think about 3 enough.
No.
So we understand 1 and 2. Get us the third cluster.
Yes. The third cluster requires a little humility, and it's about reaching out to talk to stakeholders or anyone that can give you ideas that can improve. So remember, cluster 2 gets you focused on continuous improvement, continuous adaptation, right? And cluster 3, is about connecting with, your boss's boss, someone higher in the hierarchy, your customers, your clients, or just idea holders out there that you can bring in that can help you think differently about what you're doing. Doesn't have to be long conversations, but again, you'll learn this from the high performers. They're not islands. They know they're connected.
I want to read this back so I'm clear and our listeners. Like, cluster 1 is the individual. You're trying to really hone in on that. Cluster 2 is the team dynamic. Cluster 3 is outside of that, but of value to the internal team dynamics.
Yes.
Have that right?
Absolutely.
So I think we've talked a little bit about team, the team individual, kind of thinking. So making sure people are grounded and they have a sense of their personal space and their belonging and all of that. The team dynamics, I think, are interesting. We just talked about friction and leveraging conflict as an advantage and how to manage that and making sure conflict is healthy, which, as you said, is not easy, but it's critically important. I kind of want to talk about, we call it wins, learns, and changes. I think some people refer to it as retrospective.
Yes.
You talk about this notion of reflection. I want to think about this. And I think about how, Vanessa, I think are in a time where the pace of change has never been like we're seeing it today.
Yes.
And I'm not just saying in technology alone, just kind of in every aspect, every fabric of one's lives.
Yes.
So everything is about speed. Everything is about efficiency. Yes. So in an age where speed is everything, efficiency is everything, Vanessa, how do you convince leaders that slowing down for reflection actually accelerates performance?
Yeah. It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? Well, first, let me just say this. This is what the great teams do. And you don't think they care about efficiency? It's the old Stephen Covey idea of sharpening your saw, or whatever it was he talked about, before you go and cut down the tree. What I find is that these great teams are extremely efficient, in part because they're not bumping into one another. They're not arguing and wasting time on little things, right? They know each other. They work together well. They do this often enough that these retrospectives are super efficient. Let me give you an example. One of the teams we studied, basically the research behind the book is them going into many different organizations and studying their best teams and their average teams and looking at what were the common patterns across these best teams. Well, one of these best teams was a drug development team. And after everything they did, they'd huddle together and they'd say, how'd we do? What should we do differently? So let me tell you, this has multiple purposes. The huddling brings them closer together, gets them all focused on continuous improvement. They do it often enough that it's a speedy thing. It seemed kind of crazy, but when they explained it to me or when I saw it, I could see, one of my favorite questions, by the way, is one of your fly on the wall things. I always say, if I were a fly on the wall, when I'm interviewing, I say, if I were a fly on the wall, what would I have seen? Which is absolutely my favorite question. But anyway, they're real quick. We stop, we huddle 5 minutes, and next time we go in and we do the similar thing, we're sharper at it, right? So it's a different thing than if you haven't done it very often and you come together and people aren't talking and how do you get them to open up? It's in the flow of what you do. It's a norm. It's normal in this team. It's the way we operate.
How do you convince leaders that pause is helpful?
Great question. Well, here's the issue. Leaders often come to me when they're having problems. I I spent a lot of years with my colleagues building this model, and then I spent 10, 15 years out in the world working with teams to use the ideas to improve their performance. And these were teams that needed help. Leaders will come to me and say, look, I got these great people. They're awesome, but they're just not, something's missing. What's wrong? And so I get them to try these things. And I say, you try it for a month or two and then evaluate. And if it's not working, if it's not making you too efficient, then move on to something else. It works. It works for them.
You know what? When I read this notion of reflection, it totally made sense to me. But it seems like often leaders and teams, companies, we throw it to the side. Like we don't have time for that. And I was trying to think that through. And I couldn't help but think of and be reminded of, I think it was in 1970, Apollo 13. And here you have lives on the line, disaster in the midst, right? And they didn't focus on efficiency. They focused about, we better pause for a moment because we've got people's lives on the line. And the way I recall, you have astronauts and mission control reflecting and working collaboratively in a very deliberate manner. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely.
So is that not like the ultimate reflection? Like we better measure twice, cut once.
Yes, that's one of my favorite statements.
So, okay, we're talking through these buckets, these clusters. The third one is super interesting. And I said, I don't think many do it enough, of looking outside your own self and your own team and looking at where can I get advice, guidance, insight, perspective that might be a different set of eyes, ears. I think I would call it stakeholder strategy. I can't remember what you specifically referred to it as. I call it stakeholder strategy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here again, like your research kind of shows it proves it out. And I love the idea that you've just like, hey, John, don't listen to me. I just listen to the evidence. But this might be difficult to answer because you've worked with so many global corporations in different industries. But who do you think teams overlook that they should be engaging with and could change the trajectory of the success of that team?
Great question. I think, and one of the reasons why I mention it a lot, I always talk about the boss's boss. I think they overlook people higher in the hierarchy. Mm. They will, suppliers, who they're delivering things to, who's giving things to them. That's eye-opening in and of itself when they find out information from them. But they often don't want to bother. They're often, they don't have a relationship with these people who supposedly and absolutely do, but in their mind, don't have time for them. Mm. But if you ask them the right questions, if you bring them in for 15 minutes on a call, and you ask, when we're helping you the most, what are we doing? Or what could we be doing that we're not doing now that could help you more? Or what's going on? What's keeping you up at night? I love that question. What are you worried about?
It's such a cliche question, but it's a cliche because it's important.
Especially today.
We do all wake up thinking about the next day and what's priority, right?
Right. Oh, I mean, it's you mentioned it a few minutes ago. Everything is moving so quickly these days. And, we feel disconnected. And I got to tell you, the people above you in the hierarchy feel disconnected from you. Mm. I mean, they're not going to go knocking on your door. Mm. I mean, bringing it down to a microcosm to the college environment. Let me just, I'm constantly, because I work with teams in the college and the MBA and the exec MBA in this space. And I'm always saying, I measure their performance. I've got models for what works well for them, what norms. So you've got to knock on the door of your faculty. They have so much advice that could help you. And by the way, you're paying them. These people are working for you. And they just, they're too busy. And they don't, they think that the problems are theirs alone. They don't ask for help. Asking for help is a competency. What we mean by that is it's linked to performance. Asking for advice, asking for what's going on up there that could make us stronger, it's linked to higher performance. Do it. Ask.
But no, the things that you've written about that you've studied, you've observed, you've documented, and you've seen literally in person as kind of that observer. Your book is, if I recall, the first couple chapters are, here's what the book is about. The last 8 or 10 chapters is really a how-to. It's a practical guide. I kind of want to like jump into that a little bit. This concept of disruption and certainly in the age of AI and technology, I don't want to get into like geopolitical, but like financial disruption, climate disruption, technology disruption, all of the uncertainties. You touch on some key big words here that are really, really visceral, human. They're not typically written about in an onboarding document that you might get from a company. And I'm going to kind of couch this in a human safety net discussion. So, and here's where I'm going to go with this. How to trust psychological safety and belonging, how do those translate into a competitive advantage?
Okay. This is a really important question because I don't think people realize, leaders don't realize, organizations don't realize how important those are to motivation and the way we behave in the workplace. You know, we saw some of this in COVID when people just left. So much for loyalty, right?
Right, quitting.
It was just unbelievable. And I thought, oh, finally things are going to change and organizations are going to realize. But let me just say this, that the most important need we have when we enter a group, when we enter an organization, is the need to belong. Data bears this out. Social neuroscience bears this out. When we look at, again, evolutionary psychology, it bears it out. You know, when we used to live in clans and tribes, people belonged. All right. And so if you don't feed that need, you're just going to have people turn it over all the time. You're going to lose your talent. You know, belonging is a motivator. It motivates what we call pro-social behavior. So let me say this. By all accounts in psychology, when we go into the workplace, we are what psychologists term motivated tacticians. We're looking out for ourselves. Sometimes we give, sometimes we don't give, you know. One of the biggest problems in teams these days, which bleeds out into organizations, is that people hoard their information, their ideas. That team I was telling you about before, I said people were hoarding their ideas. Why give away your best ideas? That's your power.
Has that changed? I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years. Is it getting worse? Are people hoarding information more?
It's getting worse as people are feeling more like they're treated as if they don't belong.
Oh my gosh.
You know, so if people, now here's the dilemma. People don't even know they have this need, but you know, when I give talks, I share some of the research, on how it's an involuntary need. We don't know we have it until we don't feel like we belong, until people treat us. I was talking to someone today who was saying, yeah, I was in a meeting the other day and the leader was taking notes. And as soon as I started talking, they stopped taking notes. As if my idea wasn't worthy of the notes. Okay, so here's my point. No one ever misses those kinds of hints. No one misses when they're treated with disrespect. No one misses the slights or where you don't want to hear about, you know, my sick mother or this or that or whatever it is. And so, you know, let me define belonging for you. It's I'm genuinely accepted, I'm known, I'm valued and mutually supported. It begins with being known, right? And accepted. When I'm known, I feel more accepted. When you bother to get to know me, this comes back to that first cluster of norms. You begin to build this sense of belonging. There's so much I could say about this that we don't have time.
Listen, Vanessa, like you're saying things that are so, as I mentioned, human. They're
yes.
Human. They're cross-cultural, no?
Oh my gosh, this is a human need.
This is a visceral human
It's human
need.
And people say, yeah, but don't some people need it more than others? Can't you just solve it yourself? Right. No, you can't make yourself belong. You have to be invited in.
The word trust comes to me because some of these other topics of belonging and psychological safety or whatever, as soon as I feel those starting to fall away, I start really worrying about trust.
Yes. Yes.
Is that like the straw that breaks the camel's back? I don't trust them. She doesn't trust me. I don't trust her.
Right.
I don't trust the boss. I don't trust.
Right. Right. Well, actually, trust facilitates belonging. It's a sub need. Trust and psychological safety are sub needs. And but they feed belonging. They help you, there are certain things, your need for control, your need for inclusion, all of this gives you a hint at belonging. So
Okay. So let me ask you directly. We'll use the word leaders, but a leader can be a C-suite executive. It could be a mid-career professional manager. Mm-hmm. It could be someone who's leading a team. It can be all levels, correct? A leader?
Yes, absolutely.
So we're talking about these things that could go awry.
Yes.
Belonging, psychological safety, trust. Those things start cracking and falling away. Forget it. All bets are off. Okay, Vanessa, what are some practical ways a leader can foster belonging,
Yes.
trust, and psychological safety?
Yes. Okay, here we go. Now we get to the norms. All right. So first thing, let's come back to what is belonging. Belonging is feeling known. Mm-hmm. Get to know. I get to know who you are, John, what your proclivities are, what your skills are, what you're good at, what you're weak at. Come back to any sports team, any musical group, any acting troupe. We need to know, how do I pass my lines to you? How do we work together? How do we, knowing people, again, makes things more efficient. But it feels good to feel known, right? John knows what matters most to me, and so he's going to turn to me, or he knows what I'm good at. Hey, Vanessa, you know about teams. What do you think about this? So known, valued, right? So, it's clear to everyone what value I add. By the way, we now know that self-esteem is a proxy for the value you add to a group. Do I feel like I add social worth? That my friends see me as worthwhile because I'm adding value to them? That gives you self-esteem.
Are these things you teach in workshops? Is this something you can just tell people, give them a pamphlet, workshop it?
Yes.
Or do you have to demonstrate it in different environments so people can observe, like do as I do, not as I say? Like, how do you workshop this? And then I guess the other side of that is, how long does it take to change?
Yeah, it doesn't take that long if people buy into it.
Really?
Okay. So the other critical piece to that is mutually supported, that we support one another. So basically, you get people in a room. What I typically do is I measure these things, and there's a quick measure in the book that you can use.
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
Yep, and we have deeper measures that we've got available. But I will show them. Hey, look, this is what people's ratings are of. Well, psychological safety, for one, but also whether or not they feel known, whether they feel respected, whether they feel like you're assessing their, the performance enough, whether, all of the norms that are measured are in there. And I hand it to them and I say, well, what do you think? And typically what happens is, by the way, leaders always belong. You get a pass. If you've got status or you're the leader, you don't even think about other people's belonging because you belong. All right? So great. So we'll look at the distribution of scores and we'll see, hey, there's 4 people who absolutely feel like they belong and are valued and respected. But look at the long tail here. There's 3 that scored this a 1, somebody who scored it a 3, and you look at it and you say, what's going on here? Is this okay? And it's not okay. Most teams say no. So then we say, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And, in the book, I have all these tools for micro behaviors that kick it off. What you want to do is start simple. All right, simple things. Getting to know one another often involves doing a check-in. How was your weekend? What did you do over the weekend? Or what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now in your role? And you go around the circle. Everybody gets 30 seconds. You check in. You start to peel the layers. By the way, this is what they did in Steve Jobs' team. Okay? He had a coach that worked with him on this. They would start off every meeting with people sharing where they'd been, what they'd done, what they learned in the organization. All right? I'm peeling that layer, what he cares about, right? You peel that layer in short bursts. That's one thing. Or you have another norm that says, okay, how are we going to mutually support one another? Well, one way we're going to mutually support, this is one team I had, they decided that they were going to get together and have a meeting where people would ask one another questions. Say, help me with this. I got a problem. And they did that. And it opened up the possibility.
Well, I think about a daily stand-up in teams, which is often, what are you working on? What are your blockers? That has nothing to do with all the key aspects that you're getting into, which is so darn interesting to me. So often when I'm working in a team or leading a team or part of a team, and what I've observed, we may do some of what you're talking about at the very beginning, like how do you work? Are you married? Do you have kids? What's your working style? What's your superpower? What's your kryptonite? We talk like that, right? Mm-hmm. And that is kind of then put in a box and kind of said, okay, we all have done that.
Yeah, check that box.
But
it's not a norm.
That doesn't.
One and done. It's one and done. It's got to be a routine. It's got to be the way we do it here. Now, come on. Sometimes things are fast and you don't have time for a check-in, right? But that's okay. You're going to come back to it.
Do you tell that to leaders? Is that kind of where you go with your workshopping and kind of the evidence that you found and you've documented in your book? By the way, your survey, your questionnaire that you were just talking about, I couldn't help but think about the DISC assessment, these assessments, personality assessments. And I thought, Vanessa's going at this from a completely different lens, but it made me think of those kind of personality assessments. Mm-hmm. Do you also kind of look at it like that? Like this is a different lens?
I do. There's a paper written on team personalities.
Oh.
Which are basically the norms in the team. You can think of it that way. Yeah. But again, it can't be a one and done. Right?
Yeah.
And I love personality assessments. DISC is a great tool, but it can't be a one and done, right? It's got to be one, then we do another, and then we piece all these pieces together, and we but quickly, efficiently, and it makes all of our meetings, once you feel known, it's a very different meeting when you meet with people who feel heard, known.
Here's what I will say. I think everybody aspires. It's like that 1st of January, I'm going to work out this year. I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to become more vegetarian or whatever it is. And then by April, the gym isn't for the workout center is not that busy. By May, everybody's eating ice cream. I kind of feel like that. And I'll use the phrase lip service. I think all these organizations, and you know better than any of us, we all aspire to that. We all aspire to these kind of like emotionally intelligent team vibe. We all want that. And I think we all put it to the side. It's one and done. We get to know each other. Then efficiency kicks in. Speed is critical. So-and-so doesn't get along, but we've handled that. And if there's conflict, we'll just make sure it doesn't escalate. We kind of move on. Am I right?
You're absolutely right.
So how do you break through that? Who do you speak with? How do you engage? I'll use the word disrupt. How do you disrupt that norm on that side and bring in your approach?
Let me say this, it's a challenge because this is a change. You're asking the team to change. And even though they want it, they often feel resistance because they get busy. The way we work it is first of all, we show them the data. So we kind of disrupt what they think is going on in the team, and we say to them, what do you want to change? What would be best for you? What's the kind of team you want to create? And remember, as human beings, we can adapt our environments. We can build environments that are more conducive, with more trust, right? With more sense of belonging, with more safety. And psychological safety, by the way, is that you feel like you can speak up and say what's on your mind, right?
Love that.
So you can change it. But what we do is we say, let's start with picking 3 norms. We've got 9 in the model. Pick 3. Let's just go on. Let's divvy up the responsibility for who's gonna be in charge of this. And let's hold one another accountable for those norms. All right. And then it's my job when I'm working with the team to go back and say, how's it going? Are you doing it? And oftentimes they'll say no. And I'll say, well, why? Well, start it, get going and nudge them and nudge them and nudge them. One of my favorite books is Atomic Habits. I can't even remember what the name of the author is. It's a great great book on. Well, he said, it was interesting, listen to a podcast with him. And he basically said, the person interviewing him said, well, what do you now know that you didn't know before? And he said, what I now know is that it's so hard to change a habit when you're alone. It's much easier to change a habit when you've got people around you that are also invested in this habit change.
Yeah.
Boom. And that's what you can have in a team when everyone's involved in defining what the new habit's going to be. When when it's not only the leader, I always say you don't want the leader needs to be the culture manager. Then the leader needs to say, hey, John, you're the one that's responsible for coming up with these check-in questions, or you're the one that's responsible for scheduling the sessions where we're going to talk about alignment. And when are you going to do that? So I keep on you as the culture manager so that we make sure that is a routine that we're engaged in.
You kind of come in evidence. Hey, listen, let me just show you what the evidence proves out.
Yeah.
When you take your clusters, you then can kind of break up aspects of that and start to implement it.
Yes, absolutely. And let me just remind you that the evidence is so clear. The evidence is so clear.
Okay.
And we are smarter. We are wired to work in teams. The human brain is flawed. We need one another. Go ahead.
I find it interesting because you've been doing this for 3+ decades. And this is going to kind of take us into the speed round, because I think your clusters and your approach, you've got this practical guide. It actually is evidence-based. It proves itself out. So let me just ask you some speed round questions.
Sure.
Who are you talking to? What parts of organizations do you mostly hear from?
Well, I mostly hear from higher level leaders because they have the money to hire a consultant, right? And I'm talking to anyone who leads a team. And I am talking to families, changing the dynamic at the dinner table, making it a little more egalitarian, where everyone gets heard and everyone gets the message that they're valued. They add social value to the family. I'm talking to anyone who works with groups. I'm trying to change the world to make it more humanistic because it's better. We're always more resilient, more effective together.
If a team had time to do one thing, what would you recommend?
The one thing is to get to know one another. You got to break down the judgments. The enemy in teams is our own brains. You see, the brain is designed to make quick decisions. Making decisions is energy, requires energy. And the brain likes to come to. So John, eyeglasses. He's a reader. Maybe he's an egghead. However I judge you. And I don't want that to happen. I want to see the full John. What does he like about the job? What does he feel like? Back to your idea about the kryptonite, et cetera, et cetera. But more than that, what are your challenges right now? Because they're probably similar to mine.
Yeah.
And ultimately that makes us feel less alone. That connects us.
I love that.
You want to connect people. We have to start to care about one another. And that begins with getting to know one another, the richness that each of us brings.
So get to know each other. What's one myth you would like to shatter?
Yes.
About teamwork right now?
Yeah, the one that you mentioned, which is that building a great team is about hiring smart people, hiring the best, and then it's just going to happen automatically. They know what they're doing. They're adults. These are adults. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
These are adults, Vanessa. Yeah, they are, but they need structure. They need routines. They need a structure that's going to say, we want to hear from all of you. Quick thing that I know this isn't part of your lightning round, but
I love it.
The brain sends an error message to you when you're about to disagree with someone who's higher status than you or with the group. You literally get an error. The brain tells you, mistake, don't go there. You got to be able to override that with a norm that says it's okay to do it. Anyway.
Love it. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What's one truth that you wish every leader knew?
I'm vacillating between two. The one of them is just that they need to feel like they belong. They need to recognize their own need to be cared for, liked, respected. And if they can tap into that for themselves, they can tap into it for others. Leaders tell me all the time, oh no, I'm independent. I don't need this. They're not in touch with it.
Hey, Vanessa, we're going to wrap up, but I'm going to ask you a question, and it will probably be the preview to a whole nother episode with you.
Okay, good.
Will AI make teams more emotionally intelligent or less?
AI can make teams more emotionally intelligent if it's used to prompt routines, if it's used for administrative tasks, if you use it as the culture manager. Okay. Teamwork is always going to be about what we create together when we build on one another's ideas. And someone comes up with something that is beyond what any of us individually knew before. That is a humans create that, and we're designed to do it. Every innovation that's ever been done has been created that way. Through people, the lone genius is a total myth. It's always about the group. AI isn't going to replace people, but it can certainly make us a more efficient team, and it can certainly help us know what we need to do to build a more emotionally intelligent team.
So I can't help but think about when COVID happened and everybody went remote, there was a challenge of staying connected. I think what I'm hearing is, hey, let's be very wide-eyed about AI. If we're not careful, it can further disrupt
Yes.
the critical aspects that you speak about in emotionally intelligent teams.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes. We need to be cared about. We need to be cared about. We give our best work when we are, all right? And it's harder to keep that going in a remote team. And let me tell you, AI is not going to replace that. I do my best thinking in an environment where I'm relaxed. All the research shows that. When I'm relaxed, when I can feel sort of a sense of homeostasis, maybe a little bit of pressure because we're on deadline, you need a little bit of pressure to think more clearly. But I can't feel threatened. I can't feel like I'm the one that's on the out. I have to feel part of something, respected, allowed to say what's on my mind, And again, every innovation we've ever created as human beings that's allowed us to get to where we are now has happened in groups that way, right? The hybrid thing, the remote thing, it's okay if we still invest even more in building those caring relationships. Personally, I think you need to get together face-to-face occasionally for that.
For sure. I think being present, right? Being present in that sort of thing is important. I am also curious about AI. I think it's underhyped sometimes. I think it's overhyped. In this space of emotionally intelligent teams, I find your perspective being important as we move forward. I would encourage anybody who's listening and watching to check out VanessaDruskat.com. Her book is The Emotionally Intelligent Team. I would highly recommend it. It's not just theoretical, it's practical, it's evidence-based. Vanessa, thank you so much for the time today.
This has been such a pleasure, John. I've loved getting to know you, and I've loved being on your podcast. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.